You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. And I have Dr. Miriam Kalamian. She's a ketogenic nutritionist, an author, and a cancer patient advocate. She's the head of Dietary therapies, LLC. She specializes in the implementation of ketogenic therapies. She earned her Master of Education from Smith College, Master of Human Nutrition from Eastern Michigan University. She's board certified in nutrition by the Board for Certification for Nutrition Specialists. And I met her recently in January at the Metabolic Health Summit. Very, very nice lady, super knowledgeable. I'm working my way through her book, which is, again, so chock full of information. It's a really great book. So Miriam, thanks for coming. How are you doing?
I'm doing great today, Richard. Thanks for asking me.
Well, good. If you're okay with it, how did you get interested in nutrition in general and then especially ketogenic nutrition?
Yeah, that's a very personal story for me. Back in 2004, my husband and I and our young son, he was 4 years old, Rafi, just living our lives here in Montana and sort of moving along. And just like of a bolt out of the blue, we found out that Rafi had a brain tumor. And of course, that just, shifts everything in your life just in a heartbeat, in just a single heartbeat. So back in 2004, Dr. Google didn't provide a whole lot of information. And what I did find online was just terrifying. So we went along with the standard of care, which was, chemotherapy, 54 treatments in 14 months. It was very intensive, almost weekly. And that we were told was our best hope at getting a handle on it. It was inoperable, size of an orange. So, that wasn't an option presented to us initially. Well, the chemo that, we did this for 14 months and it didn't stop the tumor. So we moved to it was just dreadful to get that news. We thought, now we can get a breather in here. And the first post-treatment MRI they did, it showed the tumor was just racing. So we moved to the next therapy, which was another 12 weeks of weekly chemotherapy while we were trying to figure out what else to do. And we weren't getting any consensus among the top centers in the country for pediatric brain tumors. Actually, we put out 12 requests, got 7 answers and 6 different opinions. So only 2 of the answers we got were along the same line. And now I know that wouldn't really have been a good option for him anyway. So we put him through that 12 weeks and then we did the unthinkable. We had surgery. And Rafi actually had 2 surgeries, and they may have, stopped the tumor in the short term, but in one of the regions, the tumor was back plus 25% in 8 weeks. So we actually kind of stimulated some growth there. And it invaded new areas as well. So now it's time for palliative care, they tell us. Only a little over 2 years into this, they're going to move them to palliative care, which meant they had no expectation of a response by the tumor, but just treat him until he's gone. And, that was just unacceptable. And I'm back online looking at forums and Dr. Google. And I found, actually, I was not looking for a diet. I was looking for other treatments, found something I wanted to print, came back a few days later. And instead of what I had initially found, I found Dr. Thomas Seyfried's newly published study on ketogenic diet and a mouse model of glioma. And it just seemed too good to be true. It's like if something's too good to be true, do you trust it? And I didn't. But I emailed them to get a little more information and not expecting to hear back. And instead, that wonderful man, he just got right back to me and sent me some other things to look at. And so by the end of a week or so of just looking at this material and looking at Charlie Foundation and some of the prior research, it sort of became well, why wouldn't we try this? We have no other options. So it's not like we were refusing something that was out there. All we wanted to do was avoid this palliative care that was going to result in infections and transfusions and ultimately not be successful. So we, with the support of actually with his local pediatrician, who was just a wonderful man, and his local oncologist, not one of the big centers, they both understood what kind of a corner we were backed into, and they said, yeah, go ahead and do it. You have the protocol for kids with epilepsy, just use that. So that's what we did with the hope that there would be some response. And after 3 months, the first post-keto MRI that we looked at was an amazing response to the treatment. So this was tumor shrinking back and his health was improving. So it was just amazing. It's not what we expected.
Now, what was the approximation of the therapy and how long did it take until you saw improvement?
That was 3 months. He was on the diet for 3 months. He was on a clinical trial. Oh, I forgot to mention that one. Yeah, he failed that too. That's when they were moving him to palliative care. He was on a clinical trial and he finished the clinical trial, and within a day or two, we had him on the ketogenic diet, following the protocol that they use for kids with epilepsy. So it was like meticulous. We were calculating out things to the second decimal point for protein and carbs and fats. And I realize now that, as important as it seemed to me at the time, it really wasn't necessary. It's just that feeling of being overwhelmed and wanting to do it right. And I see that all the time with the people that I work with. So a lot of my job is saying, hey, you can really simplify it. We still want this to be rigorous, but, you don't have to be doing exactly what you're doing. We can lighten this up a little bit to make it more reasonable part of your day. So, okay. Yeah, and if any of your listeners want that information, just email me at, I'm sure you'll post something on your site too, but info@dietarytherapies.com, and I'll send you my keto food list and simple meal template, and that gives you the assurance that this is something that's doable, even with cancer, even with all the nuances you need for cancer.
Just to characterize it quickly, was it easily doable? Was it a little bit tricky or?
It's not tricky. It's just not convenient. So it's not that this is difficult. This is even after he had this response, Richard. We were having medical professionals tell us, well, but the diet is too difficult, it's too challenging, it's too restrictive, it's too limiting. It's like, this is crazy.
That's crazy.
When you compare eating food to showing up, traveling to New York City once a week to be in a clinical trial just so they can draw blood and look at what's going on. Having to do that, or just changing what you're putting on the plate for your kid. Come on, what's the difficult thing there? Sitting in the waiting room while he's getting surgery, or shopping for the foods that he needs to in order to do this. So I just say, don't let anybody put that obstacle up for you that this is too challenging, because for most people it's not. If you have limitations in mobility and you don't have anybody home to help you, then it can be a challenge. But it's just about eating food. It's nothing remarkable or out of the ordinary. It's just about sticking to this list of foods right here.
Why do you think the doctors were so against it, or so hesitant, or so reluctant, or finding reasons to, wring their hands and tell you not to do it?
The majority of doctors will just say diet doesn't matter, and that's the green light to do what you want. But there are doctors that will put up these additional obstacles, and they'll say, oh, it's harmful, or, it's going to damage your kidneys, or they come up with stuff that is not based in science at all. There's no science to support that kind of talk. The main thing that I have to be careful of when I'm working with someone is that we have worked through the list of contraindications to the diet. And again, I have that. I can send that to people. Love to share what I know with people. So just email me. I'll send you that. So once you've established that you are a good candidate for the diet, then the other obstacle becomes, okay, where are you as far as your healthy weight goes? And what are you doing in terms of your treatment that's likely to interfere with either GI function or with appetite, taste, any of that? So, you got to kind of clear that out of the way, because honestly, if somebody's coming to me because they've been moved to hospice, they've run out of options, and they're now too underweight, to be able to start a ketogenic diet, because you are going to lose some weight starting a ketogenic diet. So if they're already really compromised like that, that needs to be medically managed very tightly. And I can't do that remotely. Nobody can do that remotely. You need to be working with somebody nearby in a clinic. And there are precious few people out there available to do that for cancer. You know, you look at the other applications of the diet, Richard, and it's the assumption for a lot of these, like weight, you know, obesity. Of course, that person's overweight. Diabetes, the majority of people with type 2 diabetes are overweight. So they have this little bit of luxury moving into the diet where they can lose some weight. So to me,
when you refer to people, when you refer to people that, you know, were, I guess, substantially underweight or weakened, is that what's called cancer cachexia, the wasting, or is that something else?
Yeah, if they're being moved to hospice treatment, that usually is cachexia or extreme sarcopenia, which is muscle wasting, or their numbers have crashed. You know, their white blood cell numbers have crashed, and you know, and they can't continue with the treatment that they're on, and so the expectation is from there the progression is going to be rapid. So yeah, if they're being moved to hospice and, you know, they're 5'9" and 115 pounds, that's not a good sign. That's not a good indication for the diet, because as you move into the ketogenic diet, like I said, you're going to be losing weight. And also, people who are cachexic don't have much of an appetite. They might only be taking in like 1/4 of what they need to sustain their body weight as it is without further degradation. And, you know, if that's all they can take in, it's not likely they're going to be able to maintain their weight on a ketogenic diet, even though we think of it, well, it's high fat and fat has more calories per gram, but quite often their GI is off too, so they're not able to digest the amount of fat that they need. And they can't absorb nutrients.
Right.
There's all kinds of dietary problems with malnourished people coming into keto. You need a very dedicated team of people, family and other support, and like I said, medical, in order to even consider starting it. But that's not the case with most of the people I'm working with. They're either at a good, decent weight, or they're heavy. And if they're heavy, they do have that luxury of losing some weight as they move into ketosis. It's not a bad thing. And that's to go back to what you said about doctors' objections. They see unintentional weight loss as a really bad sign in cancer. It's like that person is going to continue to spiral down. That's what they look at it as, you know, oh, they're not able to take in nutrients. But if it's happening because they're successful with a ketogenic diet, that weight loss is not necessarily a terrible thing. And it may actually be one of the things that slows down angiogenesis, which is the development of the new blood vessels that feed tumors. So that kind of initial weight loss can put that kind of pressure on the body, and specifically on that new network of blood vessels that are feeding the tumor. Because the body's going, well, you know, we don't have enough to feed everything here. We don't have enough nutrition. Are we really going to like funnel it over here to these dysfunctional cells? Now we better clean up our act here and save what we have for the cells that we need to stay alive.
So, all right, that makes sense why doctors, I guess it's like something with diabetes, they fear hypoglycemia at all times, so they push everyone in the opposite direction to their detriment. Sounds like the same thing with weight.
Well, with diabetes, you have that added complication of where's their insulin at? Are they not making enough insulin, or are they so insulin resistant that it doesn't have that action on their body? So hypoglycemic in diabetes can be, like, as far as I've heard, I'm not an expert in diabetes, but you know, I know people who panic when they get to 65 or 70 milligrams per deciliter of blood sugar because they're sure that they're hypoglycemic now. Actually, one of my son's nurses, she decided to do this diet for her diabetes. And when she was sitting on the couch taking her blood sugar one day, and it was at like just right around 70, and she panicked. She was like, oh, she's got to eat something. It's like, well, are you experiencing any symptoms? No. Well, now you've got these ketones that are covering the energy that your brain needs. They're making up for the glucose that's not there. You know, so it was like she became comfortable with, hey, even as a diabetic, my levels can get that low, and I'm still okay. But I have to say, if you are a diabetic, it's best to be working, and you're on these medications that mess with your insulin one way or another, either stimulate insulin production, you really should be looking at Eric Westman's Heel Care Clinic or at Virta Health, which is another online platform for managing type 2 diabetes. And they're excellent. They're both out there. They have different strengths. And anybody that's listening to this podcast that has diabetes should be looking at that.
Yeah, the reason I bring it up is because, again, I know this is not the topic of conversation, but it just sounds like a close analog to what people that are affected by cancer are told by doctors. And the fear doctors have, you said, like, of weight loss without explanation. Same thing in diabetes. It just seems like they're similar. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, that's like a failure of insulin. And there are a lot of similarities there, obviously, but there are some, important differences, nuances with cancer. I had somebody write me yesterday from the UK saying that she's heard from 3 different people that ketogenic diet for brain tumors can damage the liver and result in hypoglycemia. And it's like, I have never seen this with the hundreds of people that I've worked with glioblastoma. The ketogenic diet is not causing liver damage, The damage that's going to be caused is by the medications that are used. And at that point, you got to make sure that glucose regulation is stable. With the involvement of the liver, that can be a problem. That's one of the contraindications to the diet in my work is that, are your liver enzymes sky high? Are they off the charts? And it's not about the diet. And hypoglycemia, like we just talked about, that's not likely.
Well, let's get into this. From the feel of it for me is the advice may be go on a ketogenic diet or do this or do that. So let's say the advice is go on a ketogenic diet. From what I understand, usually that's where the advice stops, whether the person hears it from family or reading online or whatever it is. Then they go and they try to find out, all right, what is this thing called the ketogenic diet? And they implement it to various degrees. They may be doing all kinds of things that may confound the effects or make it not as effective So I'm just making this up, but it just sounds like, doing the diet, great, but what are some of the parameters for doing it right? What are some of the metrics or measurements that you can take that are accessible to most people to make sure that you're doing it right and course correcting so that it is effective for you?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. It's the abundance of misinformation out there and the lack of clear guidelines, which is I ran into, specific to cancer, that drove me to write my book, Keto for Cancer. And I've put as many of the nuances for cancer that I thought of at the time of the writing of the book, things like the amount of protein, like in a regular ketogenic diet, the one you'll see, the celebrity ketogenic diet, nobody is tracking the amount of protein. It's not really an important factor for them. But if you're doing this diet as a way to reduce the availability of nutrients to cancer cells, then the signaling that goes on as the result of protein being in circulation is something you have to be mindful of. So that's one of the nuances, keeping protein to just where it needs to be in order to support you. So that's lower than what people would do for like a diabetes diet or a weight loss diet.
Can I step back for a quick second? I should have asked you, what is the mechanism or why do we think that a ketogenic diet will help someone with cancer? So let's cover that just briefly, and then we'll go into the particulars. It has been covered many other places, but let's recap it a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So it's about the nutrients. It's about the supply of nutrients that cancer prefers. And I bet you that the majority of your listeners have already heard that cancer thrives on glucose. And this is very true. It does thrive on glucose, but it also thrives on amino acids such as glutamine. So like some cancers are very, like pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, they love that amino acid glutamine. And so just as you can't keep glucose out of your bloodstream or you'd be dead totally, same with glutamine. You have to have that circulating in your body. But it doesn't have to come from the foods that you eat. Glutamine is going to be in protein foods, but it's not the glutamine that you're ingesting in keto-friendly amounts. That's the problem. It's the glutamine that's recycled within the cell. And you mentioned cachexia before. The breakdown of muscle tissue will release a lot of glutamine into the system. So there's this thing that happens when you are mimicking the fasting state. And that's what keto is. You're mimicking a state of like starvation. When you are not taking glucose in through the diet, body goes, oh, hey, we got to do something here. They're not getting enough nutrition here. So we're going to make glucose from, the liver is going to take over the job of making glucose. And that's going to supply the glucose that we need beautifully for the body. And we're going to use these fats. There's an abundant amount of fat stored on this person, and we're going to use it to run heart and muscle and to make ketones, to synthesize ketones that can go to the brain and to other tissue and be utilized in place of glucose.
Okay. So that's the mechanism. So cancer cells prefer glucose and in some cases glutamine. So the ketogenic diet aims to reduce as much as possible the amount of glucose that's available and instead encourage the use of ketones as fuel for all cells in the body.
Right. And there's metabolic advantages to having the ketones as fuel because the abnormal dysfunctional mitochondria that are in cancer cells can't really utilize ketones as efficiently. Some people would say maybe not even at all compared to the healthy normal cells. So by compromising the cancer cells, you're setting them up. You're putting a target on their back so that the natural processes within the body that are designed to clear out disease cells will recognize them as dysfunctional and out they go. So it's not a perfect system, Richard. This ketogenic diet, I want to stress, it's not a standalone therapy for people, not the majority of people anyway. It's all we could do for our son for the majority of the time that he was alive. But ultimately, he did succumb to his disease, but it was 6 years after we started the diet.
And that was how much longer than the doctors told you that it would go, it would make it?
Well, they didn't put a time limit on it at that point. The doctor had said, the oncologist had said, 18 months was all we could expect as a hold on that. And I know from, my work with people and just reading the literature on this, that once a brain tumor gets to that point, it's a very rapid decline within a matter of months. So my son had good quality of life for most of that 6 years. And, would I do anything differently? You bet I'd do things differently. There's a lot I've learned since then. We put him on the diet in 2007. He died in 2013, and there's been an explosion of information since then, and I share every bit of it that I can with the public and with the people I work with individually.
Yeah, no, I understand why. So, all right, back to some of the tweaks that make the ketogenic diet work better than it might otherwise work, for people with cancer. So you said, monitor the protein intake. What protein or too little protein, whatever that means, what would be the effects on a given person?
Okay, too much protein. When you have amino acids in circulation, and that's what protein foods are, you take in food that has protein, it's basically the building blocks of the protein are these amino acids. And when you have an abundance of those in circulation, you're telling your body that it's a free-for-all. We've got plenty of nutrition here. Everybody can have some, even you cancer cells over there. We got plenty, so take it. And these act as signaling, anabolic signaling, saying, okay, cancer, you can grow. So the other thing that happens is we don't have a way to store amino acids. So there's a very small, what they call the amino acid pool in cells. But for the most part, we don't store it. So we got to do something with it. So, we take it apart, and then those amino acids can go to the liver and be converted to glucose. So that's one thing that can happen. That's the gluconeogenesis part.
What that suggests then is if the body doesn't store amino acids very well, if you went through a period where you cycled, you had protein as you like, and you go through very little protein, do you guess that might put a stress on cancer? Particularly one that likes glutamine?
It's not just about the glutamine. It would have more of a universal effect there. But you can't do that for very long because in our evolutionary biology, at times where we were faced with a total food shortage, not just this manipulated fasting mimicking that we're doing, but total food shortage, starvation, your body would take apart muscle tissue in order to recycle those amino acids. And some of them would go back to muscle, and some of them would be used to make enzymes and hormones that our body needs and for repair and replacement of cell structures. So, we have this system in place that we can't override, or we'd be dead if we tried to override that. So my suggestion for people is to keep the protein as close to just the replacement that you need, to use exercise as a way to have your muscles signal for the amino acids that are in circulation. If the muscles are saying, hey, we need the nutrients, you've been working us, so we need the nutrients directed over here, that's a good place for them to go. So if we can set up a competition between muscle and cancer cell for that nutrition that's for those amino acids in the bloodstream, we want anabolic activity. We want muscle building and protein synthesis in muscle. So that's a good thing. So exercise is a great thing.
All right. So a tweak on that would be, is it better to exercise right before a meal, right after, an hour after? And then is even light exercise good, or does it need to be heavy? Any tweaks there? Or?
Good question. I find that people should avoid heavy exercise when they're trying to get into ketosis. It's just one more additional strain for the body. But once you're in ketosis, most people can get back to doing, and once they've been there for a while, made the transition, they can get back to doing what they were doing before. So, everybody is sort of an individual, but my take on it, just in general terms, like I said, this would have to be tweaked, but in general terms, people can exercise and use those fatty acid stores, without eating. They can exercise in a fasted state, depending on what time of day they're trying to do this. And that's okay. As far as removing some glucose out of the bloodstream in a safe kind of way, my advocacy says, okay, you've had a meal, you've got this slight rise in glucose, it's in circulation, insulin's going to respond. Where do you want it to go? So if you were to do something gentle, some gentle activity, like a nice walk, pleasant walk in nature, preferably, then you would be taking some of that glucose out of the bloodstream in a very safe kind of way. So again, we're just kind of manipulating these pathways that are signaling pathways for what to do with nutrients. We want to push them in the direction that is beneficial for health and a strain on the cancer cells. So you had asked before, and I didn't finish that part of it, about what's the too little protein. Right. And again, that depends a lot on, I wish I had a black box warning in my book that could, I've sort of done that with my presentations now. It's like, look, if you are older, and by that I mean even just past 55, you are more susceptible to losing muscle mass. So let's add a little bit more protein in there and encourage that physical activity, even if you don't feel like you want to do it. And if you're older, even older, like 65, 75, then you need to be really careful with protein and with things like fasting, because we're just, as older people, we don't regain that muscle that we lose as quickly as a younger person would. So I'm much more careful with the older adults I work with, and I keep protein higher. But if somebody is young and fit and they have glioblastoma, and it's going to take them down if they don't, do this in a more rigorous way, I'll take it down to 0.8 or 1.0 grams per kilogram of either their body weight or their lean body mass, whatever I think is more appropriate to work with. So if they're at a normal weight, 0.8 grams per kilogram of their body weight. Or if they have a good assessment of lean body mass, then I go 1.0 grams per kilogram.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Another thing too is, again, if someone has, they find out, God forbid, they have cancer, what types of cancer tend to need certain modifications versus others? I know there's many different kinds, but
yeah. So
are there some,
Yeah, the protein, going back to that earlier discussion of protein. So bodybuilders and people who are doing ketosis for other reasons, dairy proteins are not an issue for them, unless they have a sensitivity, of course, to them. But in cancer, dairy proteins have more of a stimulation of anabolic pathways. So casein and whey, again, I have a PDF on that too, on explaining it in more detail and how to manage these things on a ketogenic diet. So for all people with cancer, I recommend that they really lower their intake of the dairy proteins like cheese. Things like milk aren't even a part of a ketogenic diet, so that's not even consideration. But for hormone-sensitive cancers, and that would be, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, the estrogen metabolites that are in dairy fats, like in butter and heavy whipping cream, those can be more problematic as far as attaching to the estrogen receptors and tricking the cell into thinking that it's a good time for growth, allowing that, not tricking the cell, I shouldn't even say that, allowing the cell to respond to this protein. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense, Richard, because those proteins that are in dairy are meant to turn a baby animal into a full-grown animal in a really short period of time. So they're very anabolic. So that we want to avoid that. And I just found out recently that non-small cell lung cancer, that there's a certain subset of people that have a hormone response to that as well. And I can't give you any more information than that. I don't really know. But, when you think about estrogen sensitive cancers, and this is like one of the failures in the traditional nutritional guidelines for cancer, they don't discuss this. So, they don't tell women with estrogen sensitive cancers, hey, maybe you should back off the dairy fats because of these estrogen metabolites. Because there's no solid, random controlled studies out there, they don't go to the common sense route, which is, hey, estrogen sensitive cancer, you got an estrogen metabolite that could stimulate it. Let's just err on the side of caution and cut that out of your diet. Instead, they'll say things like, have ice cream as a topping on cake. That's an actual quote, Richard. Some American Cancer Association nutrition guidelines for people in cancer treatment.
Well,
have
that's
ice
wrong
cream as a topping. Yeah.
Someone in my family is going through chemo right now, and at the infusion center, they're trying to give her donuts and all kinds of high sugar, high carb foods, and so they don't know, and they don't. I don't know if they don't care, but they certainly don't know, which is ridiculous.
I don't think it's that they don't care. It's that there's kind of a two-pronged thing. They want to provide these foods that we traditionally think is comfort foods. It's like, well, here's your go-to comfort food. Have a donut. We love you. So, we're giving you these brownies because these brownies are for, represent our love to you. That's one thing. And the other thing is back to what we were talking about much earlier about not losing weight. But when somebody's cachexic, they're going to lose weight whether they're eating the donuts or not. And the donuts are just going to be fueling the cancer, and they're still going to be losing weight. It's a catabolic cascade that quite often is not about how many calories you can take in. You can be cachexic on 4,000 calories a day.
Well, all right. So when you were talking about some specific kinds of cancer, is there a lookup table, or have you attempted to create one where, you say, all right, it looks like testing shows I have this type of cancer. So these are the tweaks that need to be made to my nutrition to optimize my chances for, slowing the cancer down, maybe even stopping it.
Not really. It's more of the general information that I have in my book. I do have some concerns about a particular mutation called V, as in Victor 600E, and that it may be able to run on one of the ketone bodies called acetoacetate. And so for those folks, I would rather have them be low carb rather than ketogenic. Just get the sugar out, get the starches out, go low carb, but maybe have some more vegetables. Or maybe a couple of tablespoons of lentils, or have a root vegetable that they wouldn't normally have on a ketogenic diet, just to keep them low carb, so that they're not making tons of ketones, but they are running on their fats. So if you can make low carb, you're still going to be running on fatty acids.
But why aren't multiple people heavily invested in making such a table, at least as a first bulwark against cancer, a first way to hopefully mitigate its effects? I mean, they have to make the disclaimers. It's not medical advice. Check with your, et cetera, check with your doctor, blah, 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 blah. But why is this table not out there, and why are the holes in it not trying to be filled in for every type of cancer known?
They are trying to fill them in with targeted therapies. So can you imagine, if you know anything about math, can you imagine taking these thousands of mutations that are possible in cancer and then mixing them in different ways for, each individual cancer can have just a couple mutations, or it may have 50 or 60 mutations, like a brain cancer could have 50 or 60 different mutations. And so if you're mixing them in different combinations, if you're trying for these targeted therapies, how quickly are we going to get there? So they just operate on a couple of the pathways. Well, you look at ketogenic, and because that was an evolutionary process that came to this adaptation to low nutrient availability, it's going to work on all kinds of pathways at the same time. Not going to be a cure, though. It's not going to cure cancer. So, we could go that route of trying to, develop a table like that. But honestly, I don't see that as possible. Instead, we got to look more at the underlying, hey, is this cancer a glucose-avid cancer? Does it take up glucose? Really, is this what we're looking at here in this cancer? And if you have a cancer that they're looking at the staging of it, the progression of it, or your response to the treatment by looking at what they call an FDG PET scan, CT scan, that's looking at where glucose is going in the body, we'll figure the odds. This is a glucose-avid cancer, and we are going to impact it by lowering the amount of fuel for that tumor, for that cancer. And they have glutamine tracers as well. So they know with certain cancers, they can look at glutamine and know which cancers are more avid, glutamine avid, taking it up more. But they haven't gotten the sense yet of where to take that as far as treatment. And, Dr. Seyfried is working on that part of it. He's working with a drug called, it's an acronym of DAWN, and as a glutamine inhibitor. And we have glucose inhibitors too. But let your body do the majority of the work here and then pulse these other things in where needed to kill off more of the cancer cells or to make them more susceptible to the other treatments that are being offered. But, all the reason, cancer. Go ahead.
Yeah, the reason I ask is that the treatments, and this is just my interpretation, so the treatments that are out there right now, chemo, radiation, surgery, et cetera, they're the bluntest instruments I could ever think of. So then it seems like science now wants to go to the opposite end. Oh, wait, we need to sequence the cancer and know exactly how to treat this kind. I'm saying, where is there a middle ground? Can diet be a middle ground, a midpoint where you create a table, for instance, it's not a 100% specific table, but it has certain flavors on it. Like you said, this one's glucose loving, this one's glucose and glutamine loving, this one's just glutamine, this one's ketone. Is it possible to do such a thing, and would that be useful as intermediate step?
Yes, the answer is yes. And there is actually a cancer researcher. He's a pharma guy. So he's been working for pharmaceutical companies all his professional life. But here's the useful thing in that. He also understands the power of the ketogenic diet. And he knows that the drugs that are most promising in what they call immunotherapies or the kinase inhibitors, that some of these can actually be enhanced. The effects of these can be enhanced if that person is also on a ketogenic diet. So he's at Weill Cornell, and he's developing clinical trials for a couple of different types of cancer, breast cancer, endometrial cancer. I think there's even a lymphoma he's working on right now, where he's using the pharma drug, what they call a PIK3 inhibitor. So this is a certain enzyme, a kinase inhibitor, that wasn't very successful on its own. But in combination with a ketogenic diet that is going to lower the flow of glucose into cancer cells, it's going to improve outcomes significantly. So yes, that is right along the lines of what you're talking about, and that is this synergy between what I call the bottom up, that is all of us out there who've decided we're going to take sugar out of our diets and we're going to do this and that, maybe ketogenic. We're the bottom up. We're doing it on our own without, this having gone through clinical trials. And then guys like him are the top down. They are working through the steps that are required within the pharmaceutical industry and within the medical community for proving that a certain treatment is going to have a positive outcome, a more positive outcome than what's being done currently. So they're the top down. But there is this intersection of the two where those of us who are willing to look at these possibilities for ourselves and understand we are navigating, in uncharted waters here, just, trying to pull what we can of the solid information together that, we're going to be more successful in the long run. The majority of us are going to be more successful than the people that are just sticking with one or the other of those approaches. So no, you can't just do ketogenic by itself. And no, you can't use a PIK3 inhibitor and have it be successful. But the intersection of those two, that's where the success is.
So any other tweaks that people can use to try to help themselves, and then we'll close from there. But that's my last question for now.
Good quality fats and ketone supplementation. So the good quality fats are balancing omega-6s to omega-3s, not being afraid of saturated fats. We've got no reason that I know of to be fearful of saturated fats when you're not taking them in along with those carbohydrates. The combination of saturated fats and carbohydrates may be a problem for people, but when you eliminate the carbohydrates, the saturated fats are what our body is running on. So that's what our body, when we access our own fat stores, those are saturated fats that we're accessing. So telling me that that's not good for our bodies doesn't have a sound science base to it for me. So
makes sense.
Yeah. So, and then the quality of the fats that you're taking in, like soybean oil, I think is just whether it's, GMO or non-GMO or organic or whatever, soybean oil is inflammatory, very high in those omega-6 oils that our bodies need a tiny bit of, but we're going to get out of healthier foods like nuts. We don't need to be getting it out of soybean oil. So yeah, just being more mindful about the quality of the fats that you're taking in on a ketogenic diet and the quality of the protein food, I think is important. The first priority is getting yourself into ketosis. Then you can work on these other things that are going to move your cells towards a healthier state. And those would be limiting the amount of those seed oils, and, getting, good quality animal proteins, keeping, to non-GMO foods, organic foods when possible, but not exclusively. Like avocado is a perfect example. You don't need to have organic avocados. There's no chemicals tainting those at all. So, yeah, as far as cancer goes and the nuances for cancer, people can spend a lifetime upgrading from where they come in. I don't care where they come in. I take people wherever they're coming in and move them to the next step and just open their eyes. And then if they're, motivated and interested and curious, they're going to keep learning from there. They're going to keep discovering new ways to improve on what they're doing with the diet, but also with other lifestyle factors, which are critical to change. In cancer, you need to get enough sleep. Actually, we all need to get enough sleep. You need to get sleep. You need to lower your stress. That's critical in cancer. So a lot of times, depending on where people are at with that, I may spend more time talking about some of these lifestyle factors or some of these other metabolic therapies that can be combined with the diet. So the diet is pretty straightforward stuff. It's how we use it in combination with other metabolic therapies. That's where the potential is.
All right. Well, unfortunately, I know you're only one person. You can't help everyone. But what I like to do is in the show notes, put a link maybe to some of the PDFs you mentioned, if you're okay with that, as resources for people. Mm-hmm. Or,
or they get, I would rather have them just email me. If they email me, then I can send it to them, because sometimes they may have a question about what I'm sending them.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So what's the best way for people to get in contact?
info@dietarytherapies.com, or just go to my website so they can see what it is that I'm doing, dietarytherapies.com.
Okay. Yeah, those are two simple ways. Well, I appreciate you coming on and, and all your wisdom, and, there's tons of work ahead, but at least that, we're getting a better understanding of what's going on with cancer and how to mitigate it or, maybe reverse it in cases. So, it's good you do what you do, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. Ultimately, Richard, what we need is clinics that combine these therapies and offer support to people. People thrive when they are supported, and that is something that happens. They get support within a conventional oncology clinic, but the people that I work with, or even worse, people who are just trying to get information off the internet, they have no support network outside of what resources they can pull around themselves. And we need a more coordinated, centralized, vetted source for them for getting that information and being able to implement it and ask questions is what we need. And I'm proud to say that I'm one of the people that's working towards that end. It's rather ambitious, but I believe that we will get there. And I do know keto's not for everyone. There's some people would, that told if they had a choice, if it was a clear-cut choice and somebody was to say to them, either eat keto or die, which, it's never going to happen that way, but, eat keto or die, they would go, well, I'd rather die than give up my comfort food. So, and it sounds kind of unbelievable to me that some people would think that way, but it's true. And I'm sure that, you could think of some people right off the bat who would make that choice, would be able to make that kind of choices. No, I'm not giving up my carbohydrates. My own sister said that to me. My own sister said that to me. She knows what I do. She saw what happened with my son, and she would not be willing to give up her carbohydrates.
Well, as the last thing I'll say, there's most people, myself included, you don't make changes because everything seems okay unless a crisis hits. And then when a crisis hits, you're all of a sudden, okay, I'll do it. So what people say and what they actually would do if faced with a life or death situation is sometimes very different. But I understand what you're saying. I mean, I've heard that too. So,
yeah.
Even with a life-threatening situation, some people still won't because they somehow just don't choose to make that choice. So I understand.
Right. And I understand it too. And that's one of the most important. Now, that's the first question I ask people when the adult children or relatives or friends of somebody with cancer contacts me. The first thing I'm going to ask them is, have you discussed this with your mom or dad, or, and are they willing to make these changes? Because if they're not, this is a non-starter.
Yep, definitely. Well, Miriam, I really appreciate you coming. Thanks for taking your time.
Thanks for the opportunity to share this with your audience.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.